Is it on? Now it's on. All right. Still on now that I put it in that way? All right, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. There you go, thank you. My name is Lloyd Day. I'm the Deputy Director General of ICA. Welcome to the home of sustainable agriculture of the America. Our third time here at a COP. We started coming here 3 years ago in order to have a home for farmers and ranchers and ministers of agriculture to talk about how agriculture is part of the solution for climate change. Today we're going to have an exciting panel to talk about innovation and policies for carbon farming toward a sustainable and resilient future. We're going to start with a keynote by Dr. Ratanlal of The Ohio State University. And then we're going to have a series of panels led by Daniel Nierenberg of Food Tank, who just had a morning coffee. Many of you were here for that, where we had Dr. Lal and Minister Mai discuss soil and agriculture and policies and beliefs and a number of other things. Soil, as Dr. Lal will talk about it, is fundamental for life. And he's going to have his speech, so I'm not going to spoil it. But we've been working with Dr. Lal and his center at The Ohio State and a number of people around the country and around the world to talk about and place an importance on a more soil-centric agriculture. And with this and with carbon farming, and how do we incorporate all the leadership that's occurring by farm organizations, by large companies, by different groups, like Simit is going to be talking in one of the panels. How do we all work together in order to restore our soils, as Dr. Lal just spoke about, but also to help our farmers and help agriculture in general? So this is going to be the speech, the focus of this panel. How is innovation a component of that? Because often innovation is rejected by people from around the world of all different walks of life. How do we ensure that innovation is embraced? So with that, I'm not going to speak anymore. I want to pass the floor over to Dr. Lal, a distinguished professor from The Ohio State University and the ICA Ambassador of Goodwill. Dr. Lal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Day. It's a great honor and privilege to be, to be part of ICA's excellent program. And today I'm going to talk about soil health and the Living Soils of the America program that ICA has implemented for last about 5 years now. So I'm going to begin with discussing some of the global issues. Number one, the population increasing very rapidly. Per capita land area on a global scale decreasing. Land degradation affecting 30 to 40%. The most recent estimate is about 40%. Then atmospheric CO2 concentration, 427 parts per million. Energy use increasing on 4% every year. Then per capita grain consumption, especially in developing countries, decreasing because of the several issues, quite a lot of them political. Anyway, all these 10 issues of global significance, ICA has a major role, as was pointed out already this morning, in addressing these issues, at least for the LAC region. And I think that's a very important part. And the living soils of America now being also extended to living soils of Africa is really a very important part that I want to talk about. The reason we came to discuss this activity is the Green Revolution of 1960s, which obviously was a great success story. Global population between 1961 and 2020 increased by a factor of 2.5. The global cereal production increased by 3.3. So that is quite an improvement compared to what Malthus had predicted can happen. And as a result, the per capita grain production increased by 32% over that period. And this is what people call Borlaug effect. The Norman Borlaug, who promoted the idea of cereal-centric intensification of agriculture. And that intensification part really involved increased input of fertilizer. Over that period, the nitrogen use went up 9.2 times, phosphorus 5 times, Potassium also 5 times. Pesticides 5.2 times. Irrigation area went up considerably from 140 to 340 million hectare. And we really had intensive land use from all aspects. So essentially 40% of the land is used for agriculture at present. 75% of agricultural land is allocated to raising animals. 70% of global freshwater withdrawal is used for irrigation. 1/3 of all greenhouse gases come from food systems of the world. And in spite of all that, 1 in 10 person is hungry and 1 in 4 is malnourished. So something has to change. And this is where we think that the technological improvement is going to happen between 2025 and 2050. Space farming, hypergravity condition agriculture, robotic, the machine learning, precision agriculture or digital agriculture, the nexus approach, nutrition-sensitive agriculture, where you bring in the 17 micronutrient protein, vitamin through the food, farming soil with plants that emit molecular-based signals when they are under stress, and of course farming carbon, growing carbon in land. These are some of the things we think are going to come our way, and most importantly, the One Health concept. The One Health concept said that the health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and the planetary processes is one and indivisible. And that's a very important concept. So soil health, on which I said everything else depends, refer to soil's capacity as a dynamic and biologically active entity within natural and managed landscape to sustain multiple ecosystem services, both for human and nature. And input of biomass is very critical to maintain soil health. Under no circumstances, soil should not receive the biomass. Yesterday in the FAO CGIAR, we suggested that grains for people, biomass for soil. Maintain that equity. If you do not feed the soil, there could be a problem. And that biomass is essential for soil health. And on the soil health depends the water quality and renewability, climate change adaptation mitigation, food and nutritional security, biodiversity, and in nutshell, soil health is the engine of economic development, and soil organic matter is the heart of soil health. I think it's simple as that. So farmers are encouraged to maintain soil organic matter, and like we said in the previous session, we must reward them for doing that, ecosystem services strengthening. Then once more time, the health of soil is related to something happened. I was somewhere in the middle. I'll go over quickly. Technology is great when it works. Stop. Yeah. I have done all these. Yeah, this is where I was. So we were talking about the health of soil, plants, animal, people, ecosystem, and the planet is one and indivisible. And therefore, whatever we do, we want to make sure that not only the socio-economic factor, but also the environment and natural resources are looked after carefully. This brings transformation of agriculture. And transformative agriculture, use of sensor, robotics, collect data, transmit to local or cloud servers. The so-called artificial intelligence really have to transform the agriculture. The final thing I want to mention is growing carbon as a commodity. Just like farmers grow corn and soybean and poultry and dairy, they grow carbon and should get income from that carbon. That's a part of carbon farming. And regenerative agriculture is one option. Regenerative agriculture is an idea, it's an approach, it's a concept. There are many practices under that, not just one. But the concept is inspired by eco-innovation. It's powered by non-carbon energy. It's driven by a circular economy and green infrastructure. It's supported by the recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere. We have lost 500 to 600 gigaton of carbon from land since the beginning of agriculture, and we must return it back. That's the idea behind it, by maintaining soil health. Agroecology, the Food System Summit of 21 focused quite a lot. European concept essentially, which is the application of ecological principles to agriculture. You might ask what those ecological principles are. Barry Commoner in the book Closing Circle outlined 4 principles. I don't need to go into detail, but that's the idea, apply those principles to agriculture. Then we are talking about nature positive agriculture. The idea is to protect and manage and restore the soil, strengthen biodiversity, improve water quality, renewability, adopt negative emission farming. I hear zero emission, neutral emission. No, agriculture is negative emission. Agriculture is the only industry which has a potential to have a negative emission. Reduce input of chemicals, use biostimulants and organic amendments, promote biocircular economy, support the One Health concept which I mentioned before, and of course digital agriculture, precision agriculture part. What should a future agriculture look like? Obviously a plant, and this is the difference between what Dr. Norman Borlaug, he suggested dwarf varieties, more grain, less straw. I think in the modern concept, we have a plant with a large biomass, more deep root system, more prolific root system, and this plant is grown in an environment which can emit molecular-based signal when the plant is under stress, so that we can detect those signals. Plants are grown by no-till with mulch and cover crop, and we of course integrate crops with trees and livestock. And if we can create a disease-suppressive soil, you do not need pesticide because soil is healthy. So from that point of view, the inputs of chemical becomes less and less over time. So we are not then chemical dependent. You still need chemical, but not when the soils are needed. And if those chemicals are needed, they are given as a drip fertigation. So the most of the water and nutrients are absorbed by the plant and they do not leak out into the environment. The technical potential of carbon sequestration in soils of the world is about 2.5 gigaton, giga 90, gigaton per year. 10 gigaton is burned by fossil fuel. So it's about 25% of what the fossil fuel does. We have estimated that between 2020 and 2100, if soils of the world are managed properly, the way we just discussed, they can absorb about 180 gigaton. Vegetation, especially on degraded lands, another 155. Total potential on the land is about 157 parts per million of drawdown of atmospheric CO2, which if the fossil fuel is stopped, that's very important, find alternative to fossil fuel and recarbonize the biosphere, keeping global warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade is still possible. But for that, we must make sure that the farmers and private sector work together. Private sector, especially in promoting nature-positive agriculture, in increasing access to inputs and improving investment in research, and many other things, and farmers should be paid. It is in this background that ICA started a program called Living Soils of the Americas as a carbon sink. So soils of the managed ecosystems, pasture, the forest, the cropland, the urban land, have a large carbon sink capacity, and how to refill that carbon sink and restore soil health. And soils of these ecosystems can really become a sink of atmospheric CO2 with proper management. The action needed to translate same knowledge into Africa, which needs really more fertilizer input, improves soil health. Soils of Africa are degraded. They certainly need to be looked at it. Only about 6% of cropland area in Africa is irrigated. It needs to be irrigated to 30–40%. We must remove CO2 from the atmosphere, put in the terrestrial sink, and increase the soil restoration as a very, very important component of the national program. Of course, protect carbon in soil. The idea is do not bring additional land, manage whatever land we have properly. The LISOF, if it implemented in cooperation with the countries of Africa, increase soil carbon stock, relate carbon stock to economic productivity, evaluate savings of inputs by increasing soil health, improving irrigation, fertilizer, pesticide. We talked about some of those issues which are related to soil health. And of course, do some modeling and develop scaling protocols, how we can expand what we know on a larger scale. Training opportunity, human resource development policy, like we were talking this morning. I think the translating science into action is really a political issue, a policy issue. So the soil health is promoted as a national and international goal. The mantra that Living Soils of America program of ICA is based on, that the healthy soil equal to healthy diet, healthy people, healthy ecosystem, and healthy planetary processes. And lastly, the goal is no farmer is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Big round of applause for Dr. Lal, please. He's a hero. He's an international hero. Hi, everyone. My name's Danny Nierenberg. I am co-founder and president of Food Tank. Delighted to be partnering with ICA and all the wonderful people here. I'd like to invite our panelists to join me on stage. We have Minister Jose Mai, Ignacio Lorenzo, and Graziel Parente. And I'll introduce you all properly in a moment, but please join me on stage. Give them a round of applause. Get comfortable, everyone. So this is our first fireside chat on carbon farming solutions. So again, we have the wonderful Minister Jose Mai, the Minister of Agriculture of Belize. Round of applause for him. I want to keep energy going. Ignacio Lorenzo, the Director of Biodiversity and Climate Technical Advisory for the Development Bank of Latin America. Round of applause. And Graziel Parente, the Vice President of Sustainability in Brazil and the Global Head of Value Chain Alliances at Syngenta Group. And I think I got that correct. Please give her a round of applause. I'm so delighted to be sitting with you all in this panel. Thank you for joining us. Minister Mai, I want to talk with you a little bit first because I think what Dr. Lal mentioned about carbon farming is so critical. And how do you tie carbon farming to improving food security for the farmers that you work with in Belize?
I think the important thing here, one of the salient points he mentioned is carbon as a commodity. Harvesting carbon that's in the atmosphere, bringing it into the soil. The question is, how do we convince the farmers? How do we get them to do this? And I think that leads us to the challenges. What are the challenges of carbon harvesting? And one of them is the cost. There's a cost of implementing this harvest. I was saying earlier that my concern with the traditional way of sugarcane in Belize, you burn a crop twice a year, every year. So if we are to tell the farmers, let's stop burning the sugarcane, what is the alternative? What are we to tell them? How are we going to harvest the cane? There must be alternatives. Now, the recent trend of migration from Central America, US. There's a lack of manpower. So we say, okay, a certain percentage has to be harvested by hand, and the rest with combined machines. Today, that was to create employment. Because the big farmers, they have machines, but the government's policy is to hold it down, give employment to people. Now with the migration to the US, there's a lack of manpower.
Sure, sure.
And so it has to be done in machine. And there's no burning then. But in small countries where you cannot afford harvesting by equipment, what do you tell the farmer? What equipment is? So there is a lack then of equipment, there's a cost. And the other fact is knowledge. Does the farmer know how much damage he's doing by burning sugarcane twice a year? He doesn't know. And he keeps putting fertilizer, and there's no organic matter in the soil because you've been burning cane for the last 40 years on the same area. And he keeps putting fertilizer, and his yields keep going down. And then he says, there's no moisture in the soil because organic matter holds the moisture, and if there's no organic matter, there's no moisture. And if there's no moisture, even if you put a ton of fertilizer, there's no uptake. These are the harsh facts and realities that farmers have to know.
Cost and knowledge, yeah. Thank you so much. So on that point, Ignacio, can you talk about sort of these barriers that hold back the finance community from investing in carbon farming? It's different for investors than it is for farmers, certainly.
Well, definitely the discussion around climate and nature, I'll put it both on the same page, is changing the whole conversation in both practice and also in the financial environment. Indeed, there are still barriers, and there are many. One that in particular interests in this idea of carbon farming relates to carbon markets and how they can fully develop and be ready. I remember many years ago, I worked with ICA in a specific research regarding what were the methodologies available. Not that the science was not there, there was already the science there to explain and actually account for the mitigation aspects of determining practices. However, those methodologies were not adopted yet in the carbon markets. So there will have a specific barrier that we, for example, in the energy sector, we have like 20 methodologies already included in the framework for assessment. However, in agriculture, we were lagging behind. And again, not because the science was not there. So there's a process that we need to establish to advance much more quickly in this new era of carbon markets related to Article 6, and in particular the good news that we are receiving in this particular COP regarding the advance, and how we can put agriculture in the center, at least for the Latin America, the Caribbean region, as a key area for decarbonization of the whole region. And in that regard, the science is there, the practices are there, and how can we embed this carbon farming and carbon markets and these commodities, including in new financial models that somehow can give certainty to investors that say, okay, there's a business model that can pay for these revenues, and then we can invest. And lowering, and this is something that CAF is working largely, is how can we lower the cost of capital in this investment. And in particular, currently, we're also working on green funds on how can we attract that to the region. And again, putting the case of agriculture as a key environmental sector in nature, in climate, both resilience and mitigation. And so the case is there, and for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a great opportunity.
It is a great opportunity, and it sounds like you're hopeful that it will accelerate at the pace it needs to. That's good to hear, and we can come back to that in a moment. Graziel, if I can turn to you, I want to talk about public-private partnerships. They're really needed, I think, from what I've seen and the little that I know, to adopt these practices, to make sure that there is carbon farming taking place. How can we support that, as well as support soil health, agroecological practices that Dr. Lal mentioned? How can we do all the things that need to sort of happen at once, as Ignacio was pointing out?
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you again, Nika, for the invitation. And I'm going to start a little bit picking up the point that the minister said. So farmers want to understand why they need to do something. So the first thing is about training and education. So this is a big thing that the companies can do, like the company I represent, Syngenta, but there is also a big piece of government on that and third parties. So education is one, understanding why I need to change my practices, why this is important. Does someone is going to pay something for that? No, nobody pays. That's the truth. But so why I need to change? So this is the first thing. The second thing is how are we able to demonstrate? Because I come from Brazil, so it's a powerhouse in agriculture. How we are able to demonstrate the things that we do today, that we have a good messaging, but the messaging is not spread around. People don't really get it. But the second thing, how we have data for that. So I think the pointing now today is helping farmers with the training, with the technology, but to demonstrate that. And I'm talking not just about traceability, which is critical, but when you talk about, so how you measure, as Professor said here, Hatan, about soil, organic matters, all that. So in our case, we use the methodology of the Brazilian science institution that is Embrapa, which is very known worldwide, Embrapa. But how the Northern Hemisphere accept different patterns for that. So we have to understand that we live in an environment what we call tropical agriculture. It's not better or worse, but it's different, definitely different. So we cannot have the same measures that we have for things that you do in a place where you have snow, for a place that you don't have snow. It's different. And that's the beauty of, being closer to farmers to understand that. And last but not least, when we invest in this kind of, let's pick up the data. So academy, government, companies, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Who is paying that? So Syngenta leads the largest program worldwide in land restoration in Brazil called Reverte. We have a target to restore 1 million hectares by 2030. Today we are doing a fourth of it, so 240,000 hectares. And I take samples of all the farms in an annual basis. Who pays that? To demonstrate that we are regenerating soil, that we are that we are increasing productivity and that. So we are paying that. And how we are able to and how we also compensate the farmer that is doing that. So it's about sustainability. It's a value chain.
Sure.
So you have to pick up. So the farmer needs to see the benefit of doing all this and not seeing all of this as just compliance thing because someone asked it, because someone needed.
Yeah.
But there is a value of it.
I just want to stay with you for 1 second more. Can you talk about how Syngenta is able to share the data with the farmers and help? You talked about education and training. How do you help farmers understand the data, and how does that data sharing work? Do they feel ownership over that data and are able to use it?
Yeah, of course, it's a partnership, right? So farmers are very interested in innovation. This is something that people sometimes doesn't have this is not the first thought, but they are really interested. And the soil and the land is their asset, is their everything. So they are very keen to contribute, even when we are using tools that are self-declared or tools that are audit or samples that goes to labs. Yeah. So they are very interested to know because it's their life. Right. So we have this, how we track the regenerative agriculture practices and how this can translate. Because in the past, the farmer was saying, oh, my productivity increased by how many bags? This is it. Right. But now it's the carbon. And I think it's a point for us to discuss later, is really the carbon farming for agriculture. We talk a lot about carbon credits for forests, but are we able to explore carbon credits in agriculture? And that's where we are working today.
Thank you. And thank you for making the point that farmers are very innovative. We often describe them as risk adverse. That is partly true, but they also want to try new things, and if they know it works. And so, Minister Mai, the farmers have to be convinced, for sure. But I'm wondering how you can promote some of these technologies and innovations and public-private partnerships in a way that farmers feel confident that they can move forward, that they can make these investments on their land.
I think the best person to convince a farmer to do something different is a farmer.
Right.
It's the best person. And the best tool to convince the farmer is on a farm. We have people that are sugarcane farmers and that now are cattle farmers. And when you talk to them about cattle, they say, hold on, I can't because I need vast area of land. Because the concept is one, in natural pasture, is 1 animal to 1 acre. So to raise 30 acres, I need 30 animals, I need 30 acres. And can I sustain my family with 30 acres and 30 cows? I said, no. But when you go to Cartier, they are growing 3, 4 animals in 1 acre. And how are they doing it? And then we say, well, let's adopt that technology. So we start to do it in a farm in Belize. And then you bring the farmers on and say, see. And then we say, let's break up that acre in smaller parcels. And then you have 35 animals in 1 acre, moving them every 2 days. And then this pasture is extended, and you have much more animals now. And the farmer is saying, oh my gosh, I don't need 30 acres to do 30 animals now. With 30 acres, I am doing 50 animals.
Sure.
And that is wonderful. Now, we say, guess what you need to do now? You need to plant more trees around the perimeter. So we're planting trees. But when the farmer sells his cows under that type of technology, under that type of system, the price that he gets is the same as the neighbor who has no trees. So he said, why am I doing this investment for? Who will pay me now for the oxygen that I'm producing? I'm capturing the carbon, I'm releasing oxygen, I'm providing oxygen to those that don't have oxygen. And who's paying me for this? What mechanism is going to be used for this? Well, one benefit is that he has now more animals per surface area. But he's invested heavily.
Right.
How does he get paid? There's no law. There's no policy that exists yet to say the farmer will get paid for the amount of oxygen he provided. So policy is required. And he realizes that he's getting a better yield. He's getting more money for his, and he wants to expand now. The concept that someone has shared with us is, let us do this replicated many times with many farmers. And we get someone to certify that this system is a silvipastoral system. And therefore your farm and your animals have a seal. That this animal, when it's seen in a slaughtering facility, has a seal or a brand, and it comes from a farm that does silvipastoral system, contributing to the environment. But there does not exist yet an institution that certifies this farm as such. So those are the challenges that we have, and that if we are to do this, will determine the viability of such a project.
Right. Those third-party certifications can really help farmers make more money.
Absolutely. And that is where we have to go. I think that, I don't know if it exists in Europe or in America or I think Colombia, but no one gets paid for producing oxygen. No one. And I explained at a previous forum that the policy of the government before is release you a parcel of land, and that parcel of land, the lease says if you do not develop it in 3 years or 10 years, the government has the right to take it away from you because you have not developed the land. But the land has trees on it.
Sure.
So it's not like it's not producing something, it is producing oxygen.
Right, right.
And the government is taking it from you because you're not producing something on it. So that the whole concept has changed, And the policies now have to adapt
Right.
to those changes.
Right. It's that policy and science integration that needs to
Absolutely.
happen that Dr. Lal talked about. Ignacio, Minister Mai talked about it's best for farmers to learn from other farmers. Is it best for investors and the finance community to learn from others who have tried this and see that it's working and can believe in it?
No, definitely, and part of the conversation we have at COP has to do to exchange these lessons and also see what are the models that are moving forward and actually work. And I just want to raise an issue. There's a couple of things that were already said regarding how can we evolve carbon markets so we can have additional revenue, harvesting this carbon. How can we have these seals to have a different impact of the value that we are also producing in terms of specific markets? And I will add something that is also being discussed under these financial and economic models that are arising in the context of climate change. And it's the issue of the increased risk that we have under the climate, having an activity that is fully climate exposed. In a way, we are also seeing that certain sustainability practices as a whole in an integrated manner works for mitigation, works for nature, but also works for resilience. And if you see whole financial exposure that a farmer has, of course, has to do with prices, but also with the climate. And in that regard, having these sustainable practices improving their resilience to the climate aspects, and in a way that the whole market right now is much more exposed in general terms.
Sure.
That can also make the specific farmer who adopts these sustainable practices be much more resilient in the financial arena as well.
Right.
So there's also a reasoning for a strengthened financial model that also works in an integrated way for nature, climate, both mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you for that. Graciela, you mentioned governments before, and I'm wondering if you can talk about, Ignacio's talked about, creating this resilient sort of model for farmers, but how do we create something that allows the private sector to collaborate effectively and with government and then measure the impact of these policies and how they're actually helping farmers, the environment, the improving diets, et cetera?
Well, the last 40 years, agriculture has developed a lot. And this has to do because of the innovation that has been done and also the innovation adapted to the local things. This was done by the government, but also by the companies. So I think this is a clear thing, clear collaboration. The farmers rely a lot on the assistance of these institutions, both private and public. And as the minister well said, there is no better influencer for a farmer than his neighbor. There is not.
Or her neighbor.
Or her neighbor, yeah, and it's important to say that because we have an informal survey that, let me pick up this point, that around 30 to 40% of the new generation of farmers are female. And this is, and I'm talking mainly because our informal survey is about big farmers. So we're going to see a change on very, very specific on that. And this is an important point that you said, because women are more keen to collaborate and that. So this is one thing. The other part of it is how can we also influence public policy on that?
Right.
And influence in the right way. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Brazil approved in the Senate the bill of law for carbon market. And how we translate that, because like 10 years ago, people have been talking about carbon credits, and the farmers, they sell to farmers that this is going to be, in the case of Brazil, we have 2 to 3 harvests in the same land per year. So they sell it like the 4th harvest of the year.
Yeah.
And then this turned out to be, like fake news. Nobody see that and nobody wants to talk about carbon credits. But this is something clearly where I'm also in the board, I'm the vice president of the Brazilian Agribusiness Association. So we have been interacting a lot in the public affairs arena to make this happen. It's true that agriculture has a very unique role to play, as Professor said, because when I see all the industries in the world, we are we are at the same time we contribute to emissions, but at the same time we are the first victims, and say that because the land will suffer. But we can bring the solutions, which other industries maybe
Absolutely.
not. So how can we put agriculture in this public affairs discussion to bring solutions that for this climate mitigation? So, and this is not just the farmers, not the public sector or the private sector. It's a combination of these actors that have to work together for that.
It has to be that collaboration to really make farming and agriculture the solution to the climate crisis. I want to take 30 seconds for each of you to give a call to action to this COP, because I think that's very important, that we leave with important calls to action, little glimmers of hope. So Ignacio, you have the microphone. What's your call to action? 30 seconds.
Well, I'm thinking always in the context of the region is how can we capture these titles that we already have in the advance of Article 6, is how we put it in practice back at home and have the methodologies developed so we can have those carbon markets in agriculture as soon as possible.
Right on. Thank you for being short. Graziel.
Yeah, similarly, sorry.
I'm going to give you the last word, sir. Graziel.
Well, my call to action is, if you have never visited a farm, visit a farm. Because this is the way that you're going to understand the challenges of agriculture.
Love it. That's great. Thank you. Minister, you have the final word.
And I keep saying, develop the framework, develop the mechanism that farmers can be the beneficiaries of harvesting carbon. They have to be the beneficiaries. There can be no middlemen that will end up getting the bigger part of the pie, and in every part of the world, the farmer always gets what falls off the table. Let it be a mechanism that is fair and just to the farmer.
Farmers first. Thank you so much. Give a round of applause to these panelists. Thank you all so much for joining me. Do you want to leave your headsets and go back to your seats? Thank you so much. Another round of applause. Let's keep the energy up as we go along. We're now going to have a closer look at technology and innovation that can help us advance carbon farming solutions. So I'd like to invite Robin Woodward, the Director of Carbon Asset Solutions, to the stage. Vitsa Vroom, the Chief Technology Officer for Inspiritus Tech, and Dan Christensen, a Senior Director of Government Affairs at PepsiCo. How are you all doing? Round of applause for them, please. All right, so Robin, if I can start with you, can you talk about why it's important for farmers to measure carbon and water in their soil, and how does your company help them do that?
Sure. Carbon Asset Solutions is a company based upon minting and selling soil-based carbon credits. We do that based upon a pure measurement-based approach that is effort-focused for the farmer. The farmer puts in the effort, they put the carbon in the ground, they get paid for the effort. Things that we do are all focused on measuring the amount of carbon that's in the soil, coming back several years later, measuring the gain, monetizing that gain. That's linked to any change that the farm may have in terms of emissions reductions by moving to an organic anything from a synthetic anything.
Okay.
Fuels, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, it all gets recorded. At the end of, for us, a 2 or a 3 year cycle, everything gets remeasured and gets re-netted against what that initial baseline was. And the farm is proved on several fronts. One is, once they become fully integrated into the program, they become a net contributor to solving the climate problem. They get paid based upon the number of credits, the number of tons sequestered, and that payment means they have moved from being a net emitter to being a net sequestration agent that's solving our problem. To do that, they need to do a regenerative ag change of practice and adopt what globally is regenerative agriculture that is best suited for them on their farm.
Sure.
Nothing that is advice from above. It
Right.
is all local and needs to be tailored to their specific farm economics, their farm circumstance. So we give them a map that shows where the carbon is and where the carbon isn't on their farm. and we ask them to work with a local agronomic advisor of their choosing to best optimize two things. One is the storage and farming of additional carbon, and the other is the integration of that commodity, the carbon, into their overall farm operations. So now they're able to optimize two things in conjunction with a local agronomic advisor.
Sure.
Their crops as well as their carbon revenue stream.
We talked on the last panel about how farmers learning from other farmers is the best way for sort of innovation to spread. Are you seeing that in your work?
Absolutely. The farmers that we've got that are now starting to move into their remeasurement cycle, they've been in the program for a couple of years. They're now starting to talk to other farmers regionally about how our program works, how a measure and remeasure system can actually deliver higher revenue value for the credits that are being sold. That separates a poor quality credit and a lower revenue stream from their efforts from a high quality credit. And farmers talking to others about what their regen ag changes are, or how they've adopted an organic amendment or integrated cover cropping or water reduction plans for their irrigation system, all means that the guy next door, the lady next door with the farm, can actually see two things. They can see how to do it, and they can also see the bank account change of the neighbor that's been doing it.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Vitsa, if I can turn to you, how can biochar be part of the solution? And I know you have some slides, but I really want to understand, and I want the audience to understand how biochar can be part of what we're talking about.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Biochar, so I have a sample with me. This is the stuff. Just the black powder looks like charcoal. I have some samples if you want to see more of it. Come and look me up after the session. We're setting up a biochar production facility in the north of Peru, hope to be operational early next year. And we'll be using the waste stream, the leafy material from sugarcane plantations in the vicinity in the north of Peru. What biochar does is essentially two main things. It by heat treating the plant biomass, you stabilize the carbon in the biochar, right? So instead of decomposing or being burnt, which is traditionally what happens to sugarcane leafy material, it gets stabilized, and when you incorporate it into the soil, it's going to be there stable for hundreds, if not thousands of years, which means that it leads to a direct reduction of the amount of carbon dioxide present in the Earth's atmosphere, which is why it's recognized as a carbon removal technology by the IPCC. The second thing it does, and which I find really interesting, is that if you incorporate it into the soil, it has a lot of interactions with the soil in terms of physics, soil chemistry, soil microbiology. And I think it's a great complement to good practices for soil organic carbon management. And although effects vary depending on soil, climate region and crop, research shows that generally it leads to yield improvements. That is, I think, a very powerful thing, because we heard other speakers in previous panels talk about how do you convince farmers, how do you make this work in practice. And I think this is really wonderful if you can motivate farmers to try this, to give it a go, to see if it works for them and how it works.
How receptive have they been to that?
Well, in all honesty, we're in that stage. So we are setting up field trials with farmers in the north of Peru. I can agree with the previous statement that farmers are in fact quite innovative. Risk averse, yes, but really willing to try something new and see it with their own eyes. Want to be convinced by actually doing it, not by something you tell. But the enthusiasm to participate in field trials with us has been great so far. So getting this to work. So bear in mind, we're a company, private sector. We need to get things done. That's really my perspective here. I think there's a lot of science around biochar as a carbon removal solution, as a soil carbon contributor. But getting it out there and getting it to scale is something that is really our key focus at this moment, and that just involves involving a lot of people in doing trials and seeing that it works for themselves.
Can I ask a provocative question? Because I've been hearing about biochar for a long time now, and why hasn't it scaled in the way that you, as part of the private sector, would want it to scale?
Good question, because we would love to scale, and I think we see more opportunities than barriers. I think there's a lot of chicken and egg going on, as in is the carbon market, the voluntary carbon market, strong enough and stable enough to create a revenue stream for the carbon credits from biochar projects? Is the uptake of biochar as a soil amendment sufficiently well known and at a scale for biochar producers to have that market for the physical product if you're going to use it as a soil amendment?
Sure.
There is there's obviously the element of designing the project, finding the right feedstock for your production facility, which is not always easy. So yes, there are barriers, but frankly, my view is we should be doing a lot more of this, and I think there's some inertia that we should overcome.
Sure. And sometimes these things take a while until the urgency is there, and then people decide to do them. Thank you so much. Dan, I'd love to turn to you. Both Vitsa and Graziel talked about, public-private partnerships and, how it's important for those to exist to help producers transition to regenerative and sort of transformative practices, including carbon farming. Is there a way to do this effectively that we can actually create a just transition? And, I think there's skepticism that when companies are involved in this, and especially a company, and forgive me for saying it, a company as big as PepsiCo, can that just transition be achieved?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having us here. Thanks to Aika, great programming all throughout. We really appreciated being involved in it. I have the good fortune where, I spend half of my time looking after policy for the company, but the other half of my time really I spend out in the field engaging with farmers and other members of the partners in our value chain. And so the trust gap is real, right? So when you talk to, and farmers aren't a monolith, right? I mean, you can think about them across a pretty diverse and nuanced set of cohorts. There's folks that have been making practice change for a long time, and they've been doing it. They're the early adopters. We want to make sure we keep rewarding those folks and holding them up as the example of where to go. You've got another set that are interested, but you need to understand the value proposition, and they need to know, who the partners are. And then you got another set that they're not there, right? They're not there. And so, when we think about what it takes, we just start with an approach, right? Mm-hmm. And so it really comes down to, we talk a lot internally about how the pace of progress is the pace of trust. And so we have to earn that trust. And that starts with engaging and, developing supply chain commitments in a way that's really bottom up and informed by the perspectives of the people that you want to partner with. So I think, I'll be very honest. I think there's still too many companies in our value chain that, aren't taking that perspective. Yeah. And so, when you try to talk to a farmer and say, hey, we have all these programs that we think are great for regenerative agriculture, and we'd love you to sign up for them. I mean, we're really getting ahead of our skis in a lot of cases. You got to start with here's who we are as a company, here are our values, this is why this matters to me. And so we bring it back to, we don't have a business without agriculture, right?
Yeah,
so we source about 35 crops from 60 different countries. You think about the network of farmers that we work with around the globe, it touches about 300,000 of them. And so it's a hard job, but you got to do that work. You got to start with, talking to them and saying, what do you need to be successful?
Right.
Yeah.
Can we talk about what, supply chain commitments sounds like a great phrase, right? Do you know what I mean? But what does it actually mean? Are you having long-term contracts with farmers? Are you providing, that assistance and technical knowledge? What does that really look like?
The short answer is yes. So, I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all solutions. And so it's really about meeting farmers where they're at and just providing a flexible menu of options that they can choose from. So, in some cases, here's a great example. We use a lot of potatoes in our supply chain, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so in our North American business, for a long time, still the way that the primary way you make money for us is through yield and quality, right? So as we start introducing this additional dimension of sustainability and how we want to think about, our growth, engaging with farmers, talking to them about, what it takes, a piece of feedback we got was, well, I'd love to come with you on that journey, but I need more certainty than a one-year contract.
Right.
So again, credit to us, we've started offering that option to farmers. If they want to stick with the one-year arrangement, that's great. If they want to enter into the multi-year arrangement with us, great, let's have that conversation. In other cases, a lot of it all comes down to making the business case, right? So it has to make business sense for a farmer. They are a small business owner, and so they have to, meet their P&L targets just like we do. So cost share, financial assistance is always a part of the equation. Another key part of the equation, again, this is what we hear from our farmers, is agronomic assistance. They want to make sure they know a specific practice is going to work on my farm with my specific soil type under my growing conditions. And then the last piece is, what we've already talked about is that peer-to-peer, that human element, right?
Right.
Often the best spokesperson is, their neighbor who's maybe been making a practice change for 5 years and can say, you know what, this could work and you can try it too.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of, there's no silver bullet to any of this. It has to be very place-based, community-based. I'm also thinking about sort of maybe the elephant in the room here is that as we sort of, the private sector embraces the idea of regenerative practices and starts using that term, we are seeing greenwashing. And I'm wondering how all of you can ensure that your companies are not, that you're telling the truth, that you're being transparent, that, when things don't work out the way you said maybe they would, at the beginning of the year, that you let folks know at the end of the year that this didn't work. Is that something that you all are thinking about? Robin?
Oh gosh, yes. We've taken lots of time to think about how to answer the greenwash question. And we've come up with, I guess, a family or a menu of answers.
Menu's good.
Yeah, menu's good. One is we've looked for certifications. We've got ISO 1464 certification to underpin both our program design as well as each and every project gets approved third-party to that standard.
Yeah, we heard that before. Third-party certification is important.
Absolutely. The second is measurement. We have purposefully moved away from a program that is based on estimates or models or protocols or any $3 word that doesn't resonate with a farmer. It needs to be measurement-based, activity, effort-focused. Farmers understand when they work, they get rewarded for their work. The folks on the other end of the chain, the people that are buying the credits, understand the exact same thing. And the third piece is building in insurance programs so that in the case of a drought or a loss of carbon, there's ways not to penalize the farmer. And we've built in all three of those into our program. But I think at the core of it is really building something that's based upon accurate science and accurate measurement of the carbon that's either being reduced or being removed from the atmosphere.
Great answer. Who wants to go next? Pizza?
I agree. It's a great answer. I can agree with many of your points. So I think integrity is key, especially in the context of carbon markets. Certification also for us is an important part of the answer. So we work with Pura.Earth from Finland for certifying our carbon crediting program. They ensure as part of their standard a whole lot of things that you need to take care of. Obviously, the permanence of whatever carbon you sequester, the additionality of the things that you do, but also very importantly, the sustainability of the biomass that you use, making sure that you don't use biomass beyond what should be left on the field to restore and maintain soil organic carbon, right? So certification is key there. Certification is also important for the biochar itself as a soil amendment. It's generally very good stuff, but if you do it wrong, you could have contamination in the biochar. So you need to make sure that there is quality control over the biochar itself, that you have stuff that's free from heavy metals, that's free from organic contaminants. So that's the second set of certification that we're looking at. We've recently signed also the CDR industry commitment document. That's an initiative by the Negative Emissions Platform in Europe, and really also talks about integrity and transparency in the sector to really make sure that we got these basics, these fundamentals covered. Because otherwise, without trust in the sector, be it as a agricultural input or be it as a carbon market, it all collapses. It really is a key cornerstone.
Absolutely. Transparency, trust, traceability. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, not much else to add. It does come down to having a framework of transparency and accountability. So, at PepsiCo, our goals are public.
Yep.
We publish reports. You can find them online. They show where we're making progress. They show where we're falling short. And then, as a company, we develop a mantra of progress over perfection, right? We have a lot of good ideas. We don't have a monopoly on the good ideas.
Right.
So if somebody has a better idea about how to build a better mousetrap, like, we're all ears. You know what I mean? But we're not gonna stop. We're not gonna wait. We want to get caught trying. And if something doesn't work, I think the key for us is how do we fail fast, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's learn from it, and then let's just keep going and get better fast.
Well, that's really important right now. When you talk about falling short on goals, how do you communicate that in a way that doesn't sort of, make it look like it will never work? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, it just depends on the context, right? So in some cases, it may be a strategy that had a really good concept, but in practice just didn't play out.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so again, that comes back to let's learn fast. Let's figure out what was applicable that we could maybe apply and learn and grow there. But I think it just starts. We really take and place a premium on engaging, right? And so when something's not going well, we've got a heavy emphasis on external credibility. So the partners that we work with on the front end to figure out, okay, how do we develop commitments that have external credibility? Groups like Science-Based Targets Initiative, Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We just have a constant drumbeat of dialogue with them, and I think through that it just helps us learn, okay, how do these audiences receive what you're saying, and what's the right way to communicate with them?
And it protects farmers at the end of the day, right? Yeah. This is a question for all of you as companies. How can governments, in the United States, all over the world, help you do this work better?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start. So this is my first COP, and jumping into the finance COP. I got to be honest with you. It's sort of like I'm just starting in university, and I've decided, what the first course is? I need to take differential equations. Let's jump right into it. So it's complex, but the more you think about the concept of NDCs, how governments develop and flesh out their NDCs, I think one of the most important things, and there's a couple I would emphasize as companies, is one, we can make sure that governments are also, employing an approach that involves engagement, right? So talk to the farmers, make sure you understand their perspective, what's practical, what works, what doesn't. Because if you don't do that, you're really not starting with your best foot forward. And then the other thing we can do as private sector partners is bring our peers along, right? Like I said, there's plenty of companies that, don't necessarily have the same approach. And the more we can get in that mindset of, okay, it starts with talking to the farmers, talking with the people in our value chain, and figuring out how we move forward.
Yeah, really important for PepsiCo to do that, bring the others along. Vitsa?
On governments, I think three things. One, they can be more ambitious. So if you talk about the updated NDCs, I think that there's an urgent need to include targets for carbon removal, specific targets next to emission reduction. And there's much more that needs to be done. I mean, everyone will say that at this COP, that's obvious. So show ambition, that's one. Two, make sure that the regulation is in place to do the things that you need to do. So I mentioned the importance of quality regulation for example, soil amendments, but also sustainable sourcing of biomass. So what do you do? And a recent example that comes to mind is that Peru decided to ban the burning of sugarcane before harvest, which is going to make a big impact in reducing the environmental contamination and human health concerns that it causes. It means that there will be a huge amount of biomass available to produce biochar, which we find an interesting opportunity.
Exciting, right?
Yeah. So the second point I think is regulation, making sure that you have the sticks and carrots in place for people to be more environmentally friendly in the way they operate. And the third point is create a conducive environment to companies involved in reducing emissions and removing carbon. So education and awareness can be one, public-private partnerships, there's a lot of governments that can do in that sense. You asked me before if we've been hearing about biochar for so long now, why isn't it bigger? Let's keep in mind that we're talking about building an industry, scaling an industry, and I've seen interesting papers mentioning that the business case in Excel may look fine and perfect, and the science may be there. It still takes time. And
right,
it still takes,
it's hard, right?
Yeah, it's hard. So but governments can play a major role in making this easier, taking away some of the hurdles, and creating the incentives for this industry to grow and start to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vita. Robin.
I think for the last, I don't know, since the Kyoto Protocols, government's done a remarkably good job of delivering an unintended consequence to farmers. Farmers hate a carbon-priced economy because they don't see an upside. They see cost. They see things that are going to impact their bottom line in a negative way. Farmers in Canada opposed to a carbon-priced economy. I think it's fair to say the ones in the United States are the same, and perhaps a larger geography sees a carbon-priced world as just being bad for the bottom line. So if government could do anything, deliver the mechanism that when they impose a tax or a tariff on goods, in Canada, we pay an $80 a ton emissions tax. Why not build parity that if a farmer is taking a ton of carbon out of the atmosphere, design a system that pays him $80 to do that?
Seems common sense, doesn't it?
I'll be darned.
Give a round of applause to these panelists. Thank you all so much. Sadly, we're out of time. You all did a great job. Thank you very much. Keep applauding, everyone. It gives me a minute to transition to the next panel. So in our final fireside chat, we're going to dive into the power of partnerships, which we've already heard a lot about, but it's how we bring researchers, technology developers, and of course farmers together. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Jean Stoll, a corn and soybean farmer. Hey Jean, round of applause. My good friend Siglin Snap, the director of the Sustainable Agri-Food Systems Program at CIMMYT. Give her a round of applause, please. And I want to welcome back to the stage Dr. Ratan Lal. There he is. Great. Round of applause for these panelists, please. Thank you. Jean, I've seen you sitting here for a long time this morning, and I want to hear from you if you have any thoughts on what you've heard as a farmer. Can you hand that?
I've heard a lot about carbon sequestration, what it would take at the farm level for me to adopt those practices. And there's one question that keeps coming to my mind is, how am I going to pay to do those practices that need to be done?
Right.
There's a cost for doing those things, and right now I don't see a mechanism to recover those costs. So that's the biggest thing that I see at this point.
That's a huge question, and you're absolutely right. What do you want to make sure, what do you want to see happen to make sure that farmers are in the center of this, though, that their thoughts, their concerns, their successes are heard and sort of acted upon?
Well, like I believe it was Gaziel said earlier, I would like everyone, including the finance people, the public-private partnership people, the companies, to come and visit the farm.
Yeah.
Let us know what you want. Show us what you're looking for, and hopefully we can find a way to meet that goal.
Thank you so much, Jean. Sig, you visit a lot of farms, and I'm wondering what soil innovations and technologies are most exciting to you right now.
I think it does come back to partnerships, right? Public, private, and civil society to pay farmers. So I think we're all sitting in our labs or sitting on a tractor or starting in front of your computer as an entrepreneur, and you all want to reach not just your neighbors, but the millions of farmers out there. So we have to move beyond gizmos to actual agency. So I know you want a silver bullet, but it's really about partnerships. Sorry, I know you don't, but many people do. And we all love, the gizmos. There's these great new things in your app. You can actually dig a hole and understand your soils better on your phone for free, which I can tell you about. So there's great things.
Right.
But it's really about agency and partnerships. Because just one story, in Ethiopia, we're now doing a type of guided investment. So there's actual response to lime and phosphorus and even these gizmos, because it isn't the same everywhere, as we heard from Dr. Lal, that you have to know where is the response going to be.
Right.
Otherwise, just wishful thinking, a lot of these gizmos, right?
Sure.
You have to target your investments and give agency to the farmers who make it actually happen.
And Sig, part of that agency, at least for me, means diversity in a bunch of different forms. Diversity of thought, diversity of people involved, and of course, diversity of crops. Can you talk about sort of your thoughts on why diversity is so important?
I do think that actually it all comes back to plants and people, because plants are the primary producers. Whether it's the little microbes in the soil, they aren't really, biostimulants only do so much. They actually live in the roots. So if we diversify, and there's newer varieties of wheat we were just talking about with the Honorable Minister, and others coming that actually can improve nitrogen conservation. So it really comes back to that diversity of crops to improve soil health, to nourish people and the planet.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lal, you've been hearing a lot this morning. You've also been talking a lot this morning. Are there things that you would have liked to have seen been brought up during these conversations that you haven't seen brought up?
No, I think there have been very good discussions covering a lot of things. But I must say that farmers are the center of everything. They are the ones who have to actually do what we are talking, carbon sequestration. And if a farmer is not satisfied that they are not getting what they should get, they're not sure where that money will come from, it will not happen. Period.
Period, yeah.
That's simple. Now, I want to give an example of CRP. You remember CRP?
I do.
Conservation. It was 1987 Farm Bill. And I think there are 40 million acres under CRP. And farmers are paid handsomely. That is why 40 million acres got under CRP.
Sure.
We never had flume rate measuring put on every farm to see if the runoff and erosion was controlled. If not, how much what is controlled. What did we do? We had simply said, take highly erodible land out of cultivation.
Yeah, yeah.
And we took a picture by satellite or aeroplane flying low on the ground and take picture. And if the farmer was letting these land retire and grow vegetation, natural vegetation on it, they are paid. Something we have to do same, where total price, whatever we decide is a per credit, 80% of that should go to the farmer.
Absolutely.
Not 20% to farmer and 80% to the middle people. That has to stop. They should get 80%. So the system that we have to evaluate has to be simple, direct, pro-farmer, not pro-middle person. I think that's the important part to understand.
It certainly is. Jean, how do we create that system, though, where it is not pro-corporation or pro-middlemen, it's pro-farmer, and that you feel comfortable to transform your agricultural systems in a way that will benefit you financially?
If I had the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be here. But to get it to the farmer, you have to talk to the farmer and ask them what they need. That's where it has to start. If they don't, if the people that are buying the carbon credits or anyone that wants to be involved doesn't know what it takes to do it and don't know what those costs are, there's no way that they're going to be sensitive to the farmer as far as what he needs.
Or she needs,
or
remember.
She needs. Yes, I have to say I've got a granddaughter that is going to be taking over the family farm in a few years.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. Round of applause for that, please. You know, we've heard a lot all throughout the morning about listening to farmers and talking to farmers. And for me, I've done a lot of that throughout my career. It's one of my favorite things to do. But how do we implement that? How do we turn that into action? I don't think we're doing that enough. So we can listen to farmers, we can write stories about them, we can put their data into reports, but how do we actually make what Dr. Lal and others have talked about really farmer-centered? Sig?
I think one of the most exciting things in my life is that recently in Malawi, which is one of the poorer places on the planet, that we're actually seeing that after some 30 years. I was originally sent there to improve the soils lab, which I failed at miserably, because you can't take a model of, labs separate from the farmers. So now we see farmers are actually, even just with flip phones, calling in and getting advice and then leaving advice, which is a really interesting thing for other farmers. And so that's a entrepreneur startup that actually is hosting that. But government is there too. And instead of in the past, in Malawi at least, they would very much tell farmers what you should be doing. In fact, farmers would ask, like, what am I supposed to be doing here? But now you see that kind of catalyzing role of extension and researchers and listening to each other.
And local institutions really taking a role.
Absolutely. It's public, private, and civil society in some places. Really remote areas, farmers do need that community development agency, but in other areas, it's where it's now seen as profitable to use lime or to use vermicompost, not having technology agnostic.
Sure.
Certain things are needed in different places, and so we're starting to see farmers need to express that and need to have the database so that we can really understand that better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Lal, I want to go back to the One Health approach that you mentioned earlier, because I think that's central to everything we're talking about. If we're going to talk about interconnectedness between soil and animals and people, we have to talk about the interconnectedness between researchers, scientists, the public and private sectors, governments, etc. How does that come into One Health? Can it be part of it?
Yes, very much so. 1945, we were talking in one of the panel. Eve Balfour wrote a book, One Health Concept. She was based in England. She thought that if the soil health was not better, the health of people living on it will never improve. Therefore, she had proposed that soil health management, being so critical to human health, should really be a part of a medical system. Micronutrient deficiency, the vitamin deficiency, the protein deficiency. Right now, we have 3 billion people suffering from micronutrient deficiency.
Right.
They have to come from soil. So soil health is very critical. And therefore, implementing that One Health concept, again, farmers have to implement. And the reason that concept came up in 1945 were two, one biologist, one plant scientist working in central India, realized that the health of the farmers dependent on poor soil was poor because their soil was poor.
Right.
And therefore the idea of One Health concept came into existence. So to implement One Health concept, what do you have to do? Make sure that the soil organic matter content, which is the heart of soil health, is at an optimum level, like blood pressure, temperature of human health.
Sure.
So that is the concept. So right now, the soils of developing countries, let's talk smallholder farmer, 0.2%, 0.3%. It should be more than 1%, 1.5%, 2.2% in temperate climate. For that, farmers have to be rewarded. And what is he said, what do you need from farmer? The crop residue, do not take it away, leave it on the ground. In the off-season, grow a cover crop. Do not plow. Follow complex rotation. Have agroforestry. Implement that and you will be rewarded. I think this is what we are talking about. Now, here the question is not, what if I get 10% less yield? That's the responsibility of the consumer who is asking you to do this. So it is not yield-centric, it's soil health-centric.
Right.
So the money has to come from somewhere, and for implementing this for all farms of the world, it's not going to be money in millions, it's going to be money in billions.
Right.
And therefore, we have to figure it out who has to pay. My suggestion is if it's $100 billion a year cost, that pay. fossil fuel exporting countries, exporting since 1950s, have a high responsibility.
Right, right.
Then the agro industry, whether John Deere, whether Bayer, which Syngenta, whether Pacific, they have a big stake in that, perhaps 25%. The consumer, you and me, we are responsible. We are victim and culprit, both.
Absolutely.
We have a responsibility to pay for it. So all of us, if that money goes into that, and then I said, yes, there should be a mechanism from the government side to pay the farmer. I do not see the role of middle parties in it.
Sure.
The money is coming from a source. Go directly to the farmer, say, we take the responsibility, we want you to do this, and for this you are going to be paid. Simple as that.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Jean, when you hear Dr. Lal say, you know, we can't have a yield-centric approach anymore, I am not going to assume how old you are, but I think for most of your career, you've probably really focused on yields and not some of the other things that we've talked about. How, and I'm sure there's probably a combo of, worrying about yields and worrying about environmental sustainability, but how hard will it be for farmers like yourself to transform into a different way of farming?
That's a difficult question, and that you would get a different answer from every farmer you talk to. But in our farm, I would say that personally, I want to leave my soil in better condition than when I received it. So to me, that if I have to take a small hit on yield, that's not a big deal. If I can get paid on the other side.
Right.
I still need to be profitable. So if I'm not profitable, I'm not sustainable. So we have to find that balance somehow.
Yeah, and if you're not profitable, your granddaughter can't take it over.
That is correct.
And so it's really important to have all those things in place. I really appreciate your perspective here, and I have to say that, I grew up in a very rural community called Defiance, Missouri. It was a town of 300 people. And if I had come to this conference and then come back and told my neighbors about it, they would have been, sort of astounded. And I wonder what you would tell your neighbors about what you've seen here.
First off, most of my neighbors won't believe what I've seen here. But I also live in a community that's 300 people, so it's very similar. I will have people that will understand what they're trying to do here. They'll try to figure out how they can be part of the solution. But there's going to be a certain amount of them that say, we've always done it this way, we're not going to change, until you can show me that it has some real benefit to me.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I have a question to sort of sum up for all of you, and it's less of a call to action and it's more of a hope of what you want from this COP and then, the lead up to COP30, which everyone is so excited about in Brazil. So Sig, what is your hope for the end of this COP?
Well, I'm from CIMMYT, so I'm going to go back to Norman Borlaug. So there's a huge plaque outside. It's all in bronze outside my office. And in it, Borlaug, of course, is known for short-statured wheat. We also like taller wheat, although being short is okay, too. But actually what he said is, what we need is venturesome scientists willing to work across disciplines to take it to the farmer. And I think you'd be very proud that now we're talking about partnership.
Yeah.
Partnership for agency. And I think that is what it really sums it all up, what I want out of this COP.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you. Dr. Lal.
Transform agriculture as a solution to the environment. It's a part of the solution to the environment. When Borlaug was doing Green Revolution, world was hungry. Short stature variety, more grains, less straw was the answer. That's not the case now. We are producing 3.2 billion tons of grain. And I'm sad to say that 40% of it reaches no stomach, human or animal. There is no reason to keep producing, wasting
right.
at a very high energy. Let's be environment-centric. Let's make agriculture as an environment solution. Therefore, we have to revisit. Salute to Dr. Borlaug. I work with him. I honor him for everything. But we need to revisit that concept. We are 60 years after. World has changed. today's sickness cannot be answered by yesterday's medicine.
Absolutely.
We got to go to the environment. We got to make farmer environment oriented. Do not expect them to do that without payment.
Thank you. Hear, hear. Jean.
Maybe you could repeat the question so I can
Yeah,
formulate my answer.
I just, as somebody who is here at COP, what do you want to see at the end of this? What are your hopes?
What my hope would be is that we remember Dr. Borlaug as being a pioneer and seeing a solution in a different way than a lot of other people have seen it. I think there's a divide in the people that are here where some of them believe that we have to go back to some old ways. Personally, I believe there's new ways that we can do things better. And hopefully we can sort those out and bring them to the people that need them the most.
Thank you all so much. Please give them a round of applause. I think, and Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, we want them to stay on stage while Dr. Ibrahim.
Stay on stage.
Sure.
He just needs a...
I'm going to give him mine. So let me introduce him, and then I will. So again, a round of applause for Sig, Dr. Lal, and Jean. They were amazing. It's now my pleasure and honor to ask Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, the Director of Technical Cooperation at ICA, to talk about where we go from here and what are next steps.
Good morning. First of all, let me thank the speakers for a fruitful discussion on the theme of carbon farming, but also the moderator for leading the discussions and asking some very interesting questions, which helped me to put up a summary of this session. Well, Dr. Lal made the case for why we should work more on soil health, understanding the importance of what are the challenges and what are the issues we have in terms of transforming the food systems, and the importance of having healthy soils for increasing the productivity, but also providing ecosystem services, and also looking at the advances. He did mention about the green revolution, but also I think we need a new narrative for agriculture, in which today we need to look at what are the negative externalities that we have. And I think, from my perspective, we need to retool the concept of GDP. The whole concept of GDP should look at what are the impacts on the externalities that we have in terms of the water, the biodiversity, and carbon. And I think the countries will need to have to account of how they're eroding the natural capital or rebuilding or restoring the natural capital in these economic instruments. He did mention the importance of moving towards precision farming, more innovative practices, improving in the soil health, stressing on biomass. Also, I would like to stress that we need to look at the nutrient budgets. Last year in Brazil, the exportation of soybean was 80 million metric tons of soybean. And if you account for that and 4% of nitrogen and that and phosphorus, how much is the nutrient transfer, but also how much are you losing within the system to replace and maintain a healthy soil, which is very important for maintaining the healthy soils, and what are the farming practices we're going to use to meet this equilibrium. New concepts are being advancing, regenerative agriculture. We have new concepts on nature-based solution, restoration. We have been advancing restoration. We know there are many large percentage of land that are degraded. Close to 30 or 45% of the agricultural lands are degraded, which means with good practices, we can increase the productivity of these practices while reducing the advancing on the frontiers and the Amazon, the deforestation. And I think this sustainable intensification practices that we're working on is very important to advance on that. Also, recently in the World Bank, there's a publication which shows that investing in the agriculture sector is the most cost-effective way of advancing towards net zero. But yet, the financing that we are having, there's a huge gap in terms of how much resources are being placed in the agriculture sector for the climate finance. And I think we need to build a case for the carbon sequestration and carbon farming, which has been discussed here, which is providing information and scientific evidence as to why we should invest and what is the business case for advancing in this information. Many of the countries have got in the NDCs, the agriculture sector. ICA has been providing support to many of the countries of building the NDCs, but also advancing in the strategies for the agriculture sector to meet the NDC's goals. Also, we have moved in terms of one of the things we have been in discussion as to how to convince farmers to be investing more in carbon farming. And here we need to look at where farmers are more accustomed to using private goods, selling more meat, milk, or soybean, but we're talking about the public goods here. Is it biodiversity? Is it water? Is it carbon? And how do you build a case for providing the incentives and payment for these public goods? I can tell you that there are examples in some countries like Costa Rica, which has advanced in the payment of ecosystem services. It's been there for more than 20 years already. Now they're advancing what they call the second generation of payment of ecosystem services, and I think there are learning experiences already there. The question is how to get farmers making the change, education, learning experiences, visiting the farm, understanding what are the risks that farmers are taking to adopt the practices. But also we see opportunities. For example, in the case of the sugarcane, where they are now prohibiting the burning of the sugarcane, how do you create a bioeconomy of looking at multiple value chains within that, as we mentioned, biochar, for example, which can become another source of income for farmers for transforming this cane trash into biochar and becoming a part of the income. So that's some of the income streams that we can work on and advance to look at some solutions of how farmers can work in the carbon farming proposal. Building the public-private partnerships, I think there are good recommendations coming out from experiences from Syngenta, from PepsiCo, and different organizations we've been working on as to how we can work together in developing the metrics, but also working on the data information system, which is very important for convincing donors for investing in carbon farming in this area. There are also examples where in the policies that have been advancing. Brazil has approved a law for carbon credit. I must say that the European Union is looking at a new law for carbon border adjustment mechanism, looking at how to quantify the emissions and putting a tax on that. But the question here, can we also ask the European Union to pay the net positive carbon removals that we have from the agroforestry systems, the good climate smart practices that we're having that, so we have some reciprocal way of how these taxing systems is going to be involved and engaged, and providing incentives to the farmers for these carbon removals that they're having with good practices. So I think that might be one of the way forward in terms of how we look at that. Now, there are some questions about payment for the additionality of the carbon. We know that there are good examples where they're paying for additionality, looking at the baseline information. But I don't know if Dr. Ratanlal will agree with me. What will be the equilibrium point when you have the sequestration of carbon? Are you going to pay for storage of the carbon? So we need to design the whole policy for payment for ecosystem services on the additionality, but also on the permanence and storage of the carbon. Otherwise, after 10 or 15 years, you've created incentives which can be converted to a perverse incentives if the farmers don't continue to receive these incentives. Also, I think the discussion, yesterday we had a discussion about the use of fertilizers, and today in the discussion about the farmers. I think at the government level, we need to look at the repurposing of incentives. There are perverse incentives which are driving negative impacts on carbon storage. I know of some examples in some countries where perverse incentives have driven deforestation towards more adoption of poor farming practices. So how can we repurpose these incentive schemes towards more carbon farming and more sustainable practices? This might be one of the approach that we want to take also of working and where ICA can, as an institution, can provide the policymakers with evidence and scientific data in terms of how we make decisions in this one here. And finally, the discussion on One Health, which Professor Lal mentioned, looking at the linkages between soil health, food systems, and human health. I think the importance of having a question of agrobiodiversity, looking at the nutritional status, but also very important is how do you look at consumer behavior patterns. We know that more than 30% of the food is waste. That's an issue also in terms of emission. If you're wasting 30% of the food, you can reduce the emission if you reduce the food waste. But also in terms of how do you educate consumers and have sustainable consumption. That's a discussion now being taking place, and I think those are some of the issues and the take-home messages I've taken from the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.